old conversation, that's honky talk. Come on, this is honky talk. Say what's on your mind. Truth and laughs, all unscripted, unrefined. We don't care, so we
All right, the next phase of integration or reconstructive era, if you will, post-slavery, is going to take us right up to the Jim Crow era. And a lot of you quote Jim Crow, you think you know what it means, but in reality, you probably have no earthly idea what the Jim Crow era means. But we're going to back it up to 1865, because if you remember, in 1865, December 6th, I think, of 1865 is when the 13th Amendment. 1866, blacks grant citizenship. It's a process, a congressional process. But in 1866, blacks grant citizenship. 1867, black Americans, not African Americans, black Americans gain voting rights. 1867. 1868, their citizenship is guaranteed. The 14th Amendment, remember the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment was ratified to where citizens to everyone born in the U.S. And that's one of the issues now that we're facing with immigration on a sideline topic is it's confrontational for sure, that if you're born in the States, you're guaranteed citizenship. That's still the case due to the fact of the 14th Amendment. So every black American that had children, their children were automatically granted citizenship based on the 14th Amendment. And then by that, they have equal protection under the law. Was it bullshit? Yes. Were there racial issues? Yes. Was there segregation? Yes. Was there racial tension? Without question. Did they have a fair shot at the American dream? Absolutely not. But they did have equal protection under the law. In 1807, their voting rights were nationally protected. So if you see in 1867, they gained the voting rights, but it had to go through a process to where it was nationally protected. 1871, the Enforcement Acts passed to stop supremacist violence. And the misnomer, and one of the most ignorant shit that I've read, is that everyone makes the assumption that even back then in the late 1800s, supremacist violence was just a common thing. That is horseshit. I've read various situations, and it certainly happened, and it is fucking awful. And it did happen, and it's undeniable in the history of America, but it wasn't common. It isn't as if you drive down the street and you saw, unfortunately, someone hanging from the tree, because that's the common thing that is referenced, or other shit. It just didn't fucking happen like that. But it did happen, and those that typically did it were held accountable. Again, isolated cases, you can quote them, you can find them, and that's what's used to support the narrative that white man got away with everything. It's bullshit. A lot of white men were held accountable, typically men, because men are more violent than women, but a lot of white men were held accountable. And for that, they should have. It's a fucking horrendous act on what they did. Back to 1871. 1872, Freedmen's Bureau. It ends, okay? Freedmen's Bureau. In 1865, it set up to formerly enslaved people, or to help formerly enslaved people and poor whites in the South. Okay, poor whites in the South. They were included in the Freedmen's Bureau. Freedmen's Bureau is like the prelude to all this other bullshit, SNAP, Medicaid, Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, EBT, all the other horse shit that we working Americans really fucking hate. It all started when the Freedmen's Bureau, okay, 1872, they ended it. Again, it was set up to help formerly enslaved people, which they did need. They needed a boost. That's it. Just like Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, EBT, it's a boost. It's not a lifestyle. It ended. It provided food, housing, medical care, education, job assistance, and legal protection. Which is interesting. I mean, back then, legal protection was critical. And I don't know if it's necessarily linked to the right to have representation. If you can't afford an attorney, blah, 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 want to be appointed to you. That might have been where all that started back in 1872 when Freedmen's Bureau ended. Let's hit to 1873. So you see things are happening pretty rapidly. The Panic of 1873, Harsh U.S. economic conditions force many black workers to lose their jobs. Sharecropping deepens. Poverty and debt. Now, sharecropping, in a nutshell, I think it was a good thing. Historians will say it was fucking awful. Sharecropping essentially, and we can dive into it here in a little bit, but sharecropping essentially allows a freed, slaved family to continue operating off the land, any land, and they get a portion of the proceeds for such land. With that, they have living arrangements. Houses typically are on the property. Residences are on the property. They live on the property. They farm the property, and they make money. The issue was it was somewhat of a trap. But I have to analyze the numbers because apparently it was a debt trap, not debt trap to those families that engaged in sharecropping contracts. But still, it afforded someone the luxury of making money without having to incur the debt, risk, and cost associated with generating such capital. Meaning, that's like me going into business with a landowner. I'm in the restaurant business. I lease my property. I don't have to incur the building of the building. I don't have to incur the risk of the building falling in. I don't have to incur the insurance. I don't have to incur a lot of things. And then I would have to kick back a portion of the proceeds, or I get a portion of the proceeds from the success of the restaurant. Probably not the best fucking analogy, but it's the best one I can think of right now. 1876, Reconstruction begins to collapse. Remember what Reconstruction was. The southern states fall back under Democratic control. Think about that. Southern states, Democratic control. Democratic control, racist as fuck. Still are today. They just flipped the script on you a little bit. But southern states fall back under Democratic control in 1876 due to the fact that Reconstruction is starting to collapse. 1877, Reconstruction ends. Democrats control heavily here in the South. Democrats control heavily in the South. And then the Compromise of 1877, after Reconstruction begins, after Democrats take control, the Compromise of 1877, under Democratic control, black voting rights are destroyed. Jim Crow segregation rises. And then our president, Rutherford B. Hayes, he withdraws the last federal troops from the South. Okay. Remember that. 1877, Reconstruction ends. Democrats get more control. Black voting rights are destroyed. And Jim Crow segregation rises. Ain't a fucking Republican issue. It's a Democratic issue. Think about it. These are facts. All right, let's move on to the infamous Jim fucking Crow. Everybody quotes Jim Crow, has no idea what it means. They just, I think, essentially assume the fact that let's use Jim Crow as a derogatory statement to call all white people racist, right? So, fuck Jim Crow. Jim Crow rules, white man racist. I think that's the ignorant position most people take. But I'm getting educated, and that's the whole purpose of this. Okay, 1877 to 1900, Jim Crow begins. Jim Crow laws enforce segregation in schools and housing. Don't know if that was good or bad. I think the segregation could have been good in a sense that it minimized the amount of interaction for asshole white people to fuck with insecure, honest black people. And the element, it's as if I'm in a school program, right, and I want to focus strictly on education. I don't want some asshole to my right chirping at me, calling me the N-word, starting shit. I just want to focus on education. So in that sense, segregation made sense at that time. You know, does it make sense now? It really doesn't. But we're going to a point where the racial tensions are so high. I have to be honest that if we don't rectify this issue over the next 5 to 10 to 15 years, that might be a viable option so we can focus on ourselves and not be blasted by the opposing party who doesn't share our same views, which again is the fucking reason why I'm trying to be so boisterous in this whole process because this shit's got to fucking stop. And it only stops with honest conversation. And everything I've said and will always say here is honest conversation based on fact. In conversation or dialogue with someone else, I may throw some opinions in, as I just did. But in reality, we've got to stop this and start understanding one another better so we can just move the fuck on and grow better as a society and as a country. But back to Jim Crow. So Jim Crow basically just encourages segregation in schools, housing, transportation, public facilities, really segregation as a whole. And again, I don't know where I stand on that. I see some advantages. But what it introduced is something called convict leasing, which again, I think is a hell of an idea. Convict leasing, it's quoted as a reduced form of slavery. I call bullshit. Unless those that are convicts are arrested and convicted of shit that they just shouldn't be. So convict leasing basically is where prisoners were leased to private companies. So if I owned a company and John Smith were serving 30 years for some heinous fucking crime, then I have the ability to buy the labor from John Smith. I pay the state or I pay federal. John comes to work for me at a lowered rate for sure. So I, as the industry, win. The state wins. And what's fucked up, John Smith's actually paying a fucking price for what he did, right? So rather than sitting and getting 3 hots in a cot, the motherfucker's out there working and he ain't making any money. And he's having to work and provide value to society and providing value to a private company and or public company, and that is convict leasing. Everywhere you look, the opinions are going to be that that was horrendous. It's another form of slavery. Bullshit. What it is, it's holding people accountable. Whereas another form of slavery is if those, again, that were convicted were unfairly convicted and tried, which happened, and that fucking sucks. I get it. But it's part of the growth of this country. It's the mistakes I feel this country made. But I would love to see if they integrated convict leasing back today. We have so many fucking inmates sitting right now, getting 3 hots in a cot, watching TV, watching cable, not adding any fucking value to society as a whole. Let's put them to work. Let's make them work with certain companies. Let's generate income off of their fucking stupidity and their crime. There's no shame in that at all. So convict leasing back in the day was viewed as negative, probably still is, based on what you read or who you read. Sharecropping, it trapped, a lot of families into debt. Again, I see an upside to it. I'm the optimist. I see it gave the family, for lack of better terms, a safe place to live, a safe place to work, and they got proceeds from the sale of the product for which they were farming. But the debt piece apparently was detrimental to them getting out. It's like a fucking college loan, right? So is sharecropping like college? Maybe. You go 4 to 5 years to go to college, rack up all this fucking debt, and you don't have any marketable value. You have no marketable value to society as a whole. So you got $150,000 in debt. You make $20,000, $25,000, $30,000, $50,000, whatever the case may be. Can't service the fucking debt, so you never get out. Sharecropping, you never get out. The upside of sharecropping, you got a warm house, you got food, and you got employment. So fuck, in my opinion, sharecropping is probably better than a college education for most. One thing that I don't like, the lynching and racial terrors, again, that's going to be overly documented and over-reported. Everything that I've read, stats are fairly low. I just don't want to quote stats because I don't have definitive data. But lynching and racial terror, any motherfuckers that did anything like that, they ought to, meaning any person that participated in things of that nature, you ought to bust that ass, put them in fucking prison, and just go sell their fucking labor, baby. Go back to what we talked about with the convict leasing. You do something like that, we're going to make you pay. We're going to do hard labor, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and then fucking kill you. I mean, it doesn't matter to me. But lynching and racial terror did increase during Jim Crow's because it forced people to live a life that they weren't socially ready for, if that makes sense. And you force them into that position, like what's happening now in today's society. You're forcing us, and I will use us as an Anglo-Saxon man, to accept the idea that it was my fucking fault that young black men are struggling, that young black society is struggling. It ain't my fucking fault. You're not forcing that upon me. I'd love to have dialogue and conversation so we can fix it, but you're not forcing that. So there is an element of irritant that I can understand but not justify, if that makes sense. I can understand the frustrations back in Jim Crow, back in forced segregation, because society as a whole, they weren't ready for it. We're certainly ready for it now. We've grown tremendously as a society, but we are kind of taking a turn for the worst, which again is why I'm enthused to be able to fucking at least open up conversations for the best interest of all fucking races, all parties, so this country starts fucking kicking ass again. That's what I would like to see. During these lynchings, during these issues of Jim Crow, what grew? Black communities relied heavily on churches, mutual aid societies, and extended families. The black church is badass. One thing that I envy as a white man, I love black churches. I've had the opportunity to go to a couple, and there's nothing more enthusiastic and enjoyable than to go to a black church. So kudos. That's one area out of many where I think white folk, we fail that. There's no reason why church has to be mundane and boring and quiet and somber. Fucking A, black Americans. Y'all do that shit right. Y'all fucking do it right. And we need to learn it's okay to be enthusiastic about church and raise your voice and have a good time and enjoy the process. And, well, I'm not into staying there 2-3 fucking hours. However, let's go ahead and limit it to an hour and then we'll be out. But kudos to y'all. And that all started during the Jim Crow era. We'll go push forward to 1900 to 1940. A big stretch of time. Not a whole lot changed, to be honest. Sharecropping, segregation, and northern migration. Hell, I would too. In the South, owned and pushed by Democrats, restricting voters' rights, restricting rights as a whole, post-slavery by the Democrats. I would move the fuck north. However, I would move north. That actually happened. Sharecropping, segregation, northern migration. Sharecropping, we went through that. We understand what it is. We understand my position. I think it's actually a pretty good thing that happened back then. But as a whole, you're ridden in debt, maybe not be able to get out of it. So therefore, you're limited. You can't, quote unquote, migrate. But shit, let's be real. Slavery didn't exist. Let's just run a hypothetical. I'm a sharecropper, working a farm in South Carolina. It's me, my wife, my 3 kids. We all work the farm because education was at a minimum. And we incur all this debt from the owner of the property. People didn't check fucking credit reports back then. You didn't run a FICO score. And I don't know if the processes and the platforms were in place that if I said, you know what, fuck you, Kevin Champion, I'm not going to work your land, and they just took off and headed north. One, how the hell would you find me? Because technology wasn't where it was. Social media wasn't where it was. It's got to be pretty fucking easy to hide back in the early 1900s. It certainly was easy to get away with a lot of shit. But so was sharecropping really that stringent of a legal mechanism? I would say probably not, my opinion. Probably not. Because at the end of the fucking day, if I don't want to pay the debt, I'm just going to save a little bit and shoot up north and do some shit. Violence, it did escalate. Stats do show that. But again, definitive data to show exactly the extent of it. I have yet to find anything that I trust enough to quote. 1915 to 1940, okay, 25 years, over 1.6 million black Americans left the South for the North. So there's an influx of northern flight, for lack of a better term. Northern flight from the black Americans, 1.6 in the big cities, as you can guess them, Chicago, Detroit, New York, Philly, and Cleveland. Say it again, Chicago, Detroit, New York, Philadelphia, and Cleveland. So black flight shot up there, and hence the growth and the demographic variance in those cities. Because shit, if you got 1.6 million people moving to those 5 cities primarily, you can only imagine how that impacts the demographics going from 1940 to here we are, 2026. That's 86 years worth of growth. So that's why you see a higher black population in those cities. But they were shooting north because of Democratic government, Democratic run states here in the South, sharecropping in other areas. That's just fucking fact. It is what it is. All right, since we're talking about the northern flight, for lack of better terms, where 1.6 million African Americans, black Americans, flee to the cities up north, fleeing from what? Democratic control, Democratic leadership here in the South, restriction of rights by the Democratic leadership, which is factual. It's fucking factual. Something along those times, something called Planned Parenthood, was created in 1916 by a lady by the name of Margaret Sanger. Margaret Sanger is a racist, okay? Margaret Sanger believed in something called eugenics. Eugenics essentially means that she encouraged certain populations to not have children. What fucking population, when you hear that, do you think in 1916 a lady by the name of Margaret Sanger doesn't want to be populated? Well, it ain't us white folk. It ain't us white folk at all. It's black folk. So if that ain't fucking racist, that's a problem. But it's something that the left pushes heavily to this day in 2026. The left narrative is Planned Parenthood is great. It's phenomenal. Let's keep pushing it. Let's keep funding it. Bullshit. It ought to be abolished. Planned Parenthood ought to be abolished. Margaret Sanger, she believes in eugenics. She's been quoted as saying, and I quote, exterminate the Negro population. Planned Parenthood, quote unquote, exterminate the Negro population. That is factual. That is something she said. Very few things have been quoted because I'm sure it's detrimental to the cause of the left, but she wanted to exterminate the Negro population. She wrote about preventing reproduction among quote unquote unfit groups. Now, unfit can deviate ever slightly, right? Poor, disabled, mentally ill, which, I don't agree with her, but it gives her an out. Well, I just wasn't talking about the quote-unquote Negro population. I was also talking about the poor, the disabled. Well, that's horseshit. How many fucking poor people, how many disabled people, how many mentally ill people have a great, happy, productive fucking life, and she feels that she ought to have the right to eliminate it? Bullshit. Now, her primary target was the Negro population, but she used the poor, disabled, mentally ill as kind of an out. Well, I just wasn't talking about the Negro population. Well, I'm going to be honest with you. Some of the most inspiring people that I've ever met in my fucking life are the poor, the disabled, the mentally ill. I've seen so many successful people in this life that meet some of these categories. Hell, mentally ill means now if you want to dress up like a fucking, a cat and go to school and piss in a litter box. You're mentally ill, but yet you're given rights. Well, Margaret, Planned Parenthood, didn't want you to have that right. Well, in today's world, you have the right to go in a fucking bathroom in a high school and piss in a fucking litter box, which is absurd. Now, stats. Planned Parenthood has performed 402,230 abortions from October of 22 to September of 23. One fucking year. Let me repeat it again. Planned Parenthood reported performing 402,230 abortions in one fucking year. 40% were black women. Okay, so 40 and 400, that's 160,000 young black kids were murdered. I bet Margaret's happy. Fucking murdered, right? Legally murdered. Oh, Margaret's fucking happy. So Planned Parenthood is a murder machine. It was started by a racist Democrat named Margaret Sanger. She believed in eugenics. She wanted to, quote-unquote, exterminate the Negro population, and that still continues to be pushed heavily with the Democratic liberals today in 2026.
Just bold conversation, that's honky talk. This is honky talk.